Hey, good morning, guys. So this one's going to be a subscriber-only stream, right? And then what I'll do is I'll release it in the next couple of days out to the general public, probably on YouTube, right? So I just wanted to kind of update you again, given the current price action. I know some of you guys are going to be kind of FOMOing into this. You're going to be thinking, oh, I've missed this and I've missed that, and we haven't seen this and we haven't seen that. And I just want to go back to, why I've kept saying, nothing's changed. And for me, still nothing's changed, right? Now, if you don't watch my videos, you haven't seen what I've said and the reason behind why nothing's changed, right? Then don't even bother commenting, on YouTube. I think the point being is you've got to look back at the three core options, right, from down low. Now, I'm going to tag these as kind of best case scenario, right? Kind of okay scenario, worst case scenario, right? And this is the order that I'm going to put them in. So way back when, right? I talked about the first thing being the expected accumulation range. Now, this accumulation range, in an ideal world, we would have come down from here, not up, back down, played around, back down, right? Back the opposite way, something like this, right? That would have given us momentum to the upside, right? So why for me this was the best case scenario, right? So obviously we didn't get this, right? We had the fake BlackRock kind of pump, and we've kind of went sideways kind of after the ETF. We've now got this, right? Now the question that we now have, right, is, you know, confirmation is king, right? Confirmation is the main key. You know, question is going to be, why didn't you buy at the bottom, right? Why didn't you buy on the breakout? All of these things are, if you're trading at small time frame, you got to find your own confirmation for why you would have taken these trades with that kind of logic, right? At the moment, this is, still a 50-50 punt, right? And that's still even after knowing what happened, right? That's not how you trade professionally, right? This is where a lot of people use, too big of a stop loss, if a stop loss at all, too much leverage, et cetera, et cetera. And you've only got to go back to the lessons with GameStop to understand, what ends up happening in the end, right? So this was option one, right? Now, this particular option I covered in the book, right? And the book obviously was launched in, I think it was May last year. I talked about the accumulation phase, right? Now, where obviously, you kind of see where we were expecting this move to obviously come back down for the AR to, let me see if I can get rid of this a second and make it a bit bigger. Drag this out a bit more. So the general idea, right, was obviously at this particular point, we would have loved to have seen, right, whether we were there or whether we were there, right? These were the two options at that point within the accumulation, right? But obviously, I feel that, maybe we were there, right? And this is why I'm saying the next scenario is almost like an okay scenario, right? Because the next thing that I actually talked about, let me hide this again. The next thing I actually talked about, right, was the option for this being the logical B, right? So let me come into this one, and I'm going to share this as the logical B, if I can find the chart, this one. This was obviously in September 2022, right? And I talked about this as a range, right? This kind of cluster, a lot of volume sitting in that cluster. Talked about the price being, 4A up for 4B, down for 4C, right? Now, a lot of people will say, oh, well, you're bearish. Oh, you're always bearish. No, the reality is, right, this doesn't have to go to 9K, it doesn't have to go to 12K. This could be back down to 19, 20K, 25K. As long as you grab the liquidity, you've got the fuel to carry on the move, yeah? So, in terms of breaking down the logic, when I look at this particular move now, this is what I put the obvious B. Now, it's on a weekly time frame. The obvious B right now, we haven't closed above this area, right? Technically, as I've talked about, until we break this high, we haven't actually created a new, you know, upward move. If you were to look at, lower lows and lower highs, higher lows and higher, highs, the reality is right now, we've actually gone and made, a higher high than this, and we failed so far to take the higher high. So the momentum overall is not actually all that bullish yet, right? So again, don't fear, missing something like this at the moment, right? There's plenty of opportunities in other markets, in Forex and, oil and gold and so on. And it doesn't have to be a kind of buy in hold. This can be a kind of buy in out. And I showed you guys obviously in the Discord the start of February. I traded the non-farm payroll and took a 48% trade within less than a minute, right? So these opportunities are plentiful. And it's not, me saying, oh, look, you can do this, you can do that. But even if you were to take, 10 trades at 4%, it's still the same kind of value overall, right? So the point being, where we are right now, this is kind of the okay-ish scenario, right? This is the way I think where we are right now. We have an issue and a benefit, right? The issue is, if we technically close up and above this region, right, the main issue that we have is we've got this area up here. Now, at this particular point, if we were to get up here, there's going to be an awful lot of positions. You're going to have maybe the option for a breakout, right? Which means there's going to be an awful lot of new orders coming in. You're going to have potential stops, right, from people who shorted down here, right? You've got, your real true permeables, bears, sorry, in terms of, Bitcoin's going to zero. So the issue that you have, right, is if we grind up, you have to look at what that means for the bigger picture. So let's have a little look at things like the retracements, right? We're going to go from top to the bottom. We've clearly got an 8-6 right now. I really like an 8-6 as a deep one, right? We've got a 7-8-6 that we haven't quite pinged there, right? And obviously we've got the option to break into, new highs. The reason that I don't see this coming in terms of new highs, right, is the liquidity that we've kind of left behind. So the options that we have right now is, let's assume that this option is currently the best option on the table. And let me explain why. Don't just go, oh, you're bearish again. No. The reality is, if we come up here to here, and that's roughly the same kind of levels, it's the same there to there, it is there to there. Right? So 9 times out of 10, you'd expect the extension to go to your 1618 on a move like this. All we've done right now, right, is obviously come a little bit further, right, than expected, a little bit further than you'd like, and we still haven't closed, right? So it could easily be a fake up, right? It could easily be a move like this. So if I was to scroll down, let me see if I can find, I think it's this one. If I talk about this particular play, right, this goes back from the first major 65k high. If I zoom in, A was pretty much to the pip. Right? What happened to the move B is B hyperextended 2.5k, which meant C basically didn't get 2.5k. D basically hyperextended because we didn't have the same. So the relationship, right, if I was to move this zigzag, the relationship is pretty much the same apart from that 2.5k, right? It's 2.5k, 2.5k, right, which is really interesting in its own right, right? So if we put all these kind of pieces together, all we've done right now, right, is one of two things in terms of this potential scenario, option B, right? This is the option that I covered obviously in, I think it was, where's the post again, just to be sure. This was the option in this one, right, which obviously takes us back to the September. And this was the option I said I hoped we didn't get. And the reason I hope, right, that we didn't get it is that it would have meant that the accumulation hadn't completed. So ultimately now, for me, this option's still on the table. We've come up, we've hyperextended, we haven't closed, this is a weekly time frame, etc., 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 all that kind of good stuff. Now, into the third option, right? And the third option is kind of the ugliest, the worst of the bunch, right? This is why I said this worst case scenario. Back last year, I painted a couple of different pictures. So this was from April 2023. I painted a couple of pictures, right, which basically highlighted a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 move in Elliott wave terms, right? And this is where it gets a little bit more kind of scary in terms of what we could be seeing next, right? So let me come back to the chart. Now, I've called this brutal, right? So I'll put this on the chart in a second. But before I do that, what I want to do is just go back a little bit in time and talk about the moves overall, right? Because if we were to look at this from a 0, right, clear 1, down for a 2, and this is in black at the minute, right? I'll show you this now in a second. We would have had obviously the 3, the 4, and the 5, right? We'll change this to white. There we go, right? So we would have had a move look something similar to this. This being obviously the end there. Right? We're now going to put what we could deem potentially an A, a B, a C. Right? Same problem, back to white. Okay, so if we now assume that at this kind of 5 level, we'd be deeming this as a much larger scale 1. Right? Let's assume that we are bullish from here. We'd have to put this as our current 2. Okay. Now, if I was to look at this as my current 2, what I now need to do is understand what's going on inside of the 2. Because what I can do, I can now do this. I can use my extension tool. I don't have to go to where it was. I just need to go to the rough level, right? So it's roughly 0. Good enough. There to there, right? And then back down, obviously, to the 2. Yep. The issue is I've got to come all the way to this one. There we go. Okay. That's close enough, close enough, close enough, right? So what we now have is the potential for the 3 to bring us to about 125k, 126, give or take, right? Then ultimately you tend to come back roughly to the 100, right, for a 4. And then we can play up to the 2618 for a 5. Okay. Now, a lot of you are going, oh, we're on the way to 200k. Just hold your horses. Right? Let me explain a second as to why this is a massive, massive move. Put this into perspective. It's taken us nearly 15 years to get to here. Right? So, some of you, especially on YouTube, are going to come out and they're going to say things like, oh, the halving, oh, the ETFs, all this, all that, the other. As we're still 15 years into a technology, right? The transition is early, right? 15 years sounds a long time. It's not in technology terms. Right? In terms of where we are right now, the issue that we have for us to get to our 125-ish, let's put that in green, right? For us to get to that kind of level, we've now got to look inside what's called the nested moves and the nested waves. Right? So if we were to do exactly the same thing as it did with the one, we're going to have to go up probably this one most likely, which means we kind of hyperextended this one. This was very likely the 3, 4, which means the 5, right, could take us to 59.6, right? I can't quite see the logic, if I'm honest, as to 70k just yet, right? Now, again, just kind of bear with me a second. The reason that this kind of makes a bit of sense, right, is that this would be deemed as the internal one, right? That internal one of the nested one, which means we have to come back down, and it's often quite deep for a 2. There's a lot of logic behind that, right? Now, if we were to put this, I'll do those 2 circles, right? Excuse the drawings. If we were to do something like this, right? Let's assume that this is kind of where we currently at. Now, what I can do is I can do exactly the same thing again, and I can go from the low, right? Let's assume that the 1 is that 59-ish level. Let's assume we come back down to just the obvious liquidity, right? What we're likely to do, look, right, is do something that looks like this, right? And then we come back down again, and then we come up again, right, to our overall levels. Now, at this particular stage, right, this is very, very plausible, right? This is very, very bullish. However, the big question mark is where is the liquidity for the drop, right? So that's one major option inside, right, of the current situation. This one's the best of the two options, right, in terms of the best of the two options of the third option I've talked about. Okay, so, you know, keep this in mind a second, right? Actually, what I'll do is I'll take a screenshot of this, I'll copy the link, and I'll stick that in there, like this, right? I'll share that later. Now, the next option that we have, right, is if I was to go and, that's all, let me put all these into some kind of folder if I can. Okay, so, click. Sorry guys, this one's a bit long-winded. I just don't do any editing when I do these videos. So I'm going to stick them into a folder called Group 1. I've actually still got quite a lot left in there. I'll put all these in there as well, just so you know, it's Group 1. And actually I'll put that, I'll change the name if I can. That's Feb 27th, 24. Okay, let me hide these. Right, so that was the best of the two options, right? And what I've tried to do is go from obviously the best option being the accumulation, right? Being this one. The second best option being the B, right? So again, in an ideal world, I hope, right, for everyone's sake, that ultimately we get this kind of half decent pullback because, the further up we go, the more aggressive the pullback will become because there's going to be a lot more liquidity fueling that pullback, right? Obvious. So, third option, talk about this being brutal, right? Now, these are the kinds of plays, look, right? These are the kinds of same scenarios, right? However, if we look at the level, now I used this level just now, right, as the 1-2. If we were to look at a couple of scenarios and we would say, well, we want this to go up further, we're going to look at the slightly higher 1-2, right, which is obviously like a lot more kind of aggressive, if you will. There's a lot more substance there compared to this, right? For a nested move on a daily time frame using the weekly chart, it kind of makes a bit more sense, right? So obviously at this particular point, we've got a 3 that we've now just kind of tagged. If I was to put this level, this goes back, a long, long time, right? We've kind of tagged 4 as well, right? So, if this was a 1-2, 1-2 and 3-4 are often the inverse to each other, right? So if we've had a longish 1-2, we've had a very quick 3-4. Plausible. Which then brings me back to the scenario of, if we were to use this now as our kind of 1-2 play, right? We've actually got the hyperextension now coming in at roughly 68k, right? Which brings us back to the triple top. So in any which scenario that I'm currently seeing, I'm seeing between 59 and 70k, a 10k range, right? I don't see this 5 anymore. I think this 5, up high, I don't see any reason as to why we would go another 10k beyond without that kind of half decent pullback. There's going to be liquidity, 1 to 2k in past the 69k high. So 71, 72 with a bit of hopium. After that, I think the kind of the buying will dry up until people know, which direction we likely to go from there, right? So I think in any which way, you've just got to take this, very carefully. So the next option, obviously, is if we do go into this as a range, right, then I would expect, 59 to 65, right, as a range for a potential 5 move, right? And that's just, again, being kind of optimistic in terms of where we go. I think that becomes the fuel for what is now deemed as, right, and I'll change the color to make it easier to see. realistically, right, if that becomes a 1, this obviously was the major, major 1, right? Like this. This was the major 2, right, in that sense. Now what we'll be seeing is a 1 to come back for a 2. Then obviously we can go 3, 4, 5, etc. Right? Now at this particular point, I can see, how you can justify the 3 being about 125k, right? And that's, again, realistic, kind of optimistic, and, kind of backed up with some logic, right? So where we are right now, let's assume that we kind of carry on this little move up, right? We get a little dart up, we get, more people kind of suckered into buying, going long, going long, going long. Then obviously we get to a point where we can start to measure how far back a 2 is likely to come. Right now, we've talked about obviously. Let's give this kind of an idea. If this was our 2 there, right? Let's just use this as the example. We come back all the way to the 786. Right? That's a pretty decent pocket for a 2. So again, plausible. Right? Now let's assume that we do the same thing and we use the same kind of levels. We've gone low. Let's use the high at this. Let's hyperextend it, and we go to the current all-time high roughly. We're still very likely to see kind of a 786, right? You could see a 618, right? That's obviously another big number. I would say somewhere in that pocket is more than plausible. Then I think if we see something like that, we could easily go up to come down, and then we start seeking the 125k. Right? So that for me is kind of like the worst case scenario to a degree, right? And the reason again that I'm calling this the worst case is we didn't accumulate enough down at 35k, 32, 33, 34k. We didn't accumulate enough at that region. We've kind of gone up, but it's not gone up with great momentum, right? You'd expect a move like this if it was bullish to be breaking through new, all-time highs and just kind of continuing. We kind of struggle to do that with no real volume behind these moves, right? So at the moment, my fear is a lot of retail, jumped on the bandwagon, and at the moment it's, we can't lose, we winning, big boys getting wrecked. The question comes back to who the hell do you think is actually selling to you? Right? Now, I've joked with my group that, if the price hits 60k again, I'll probably get rid of all of my Bitcoin, right? And at that particular stage, it's kind of less interesting to me, right? Because I think if we get to the 60k now, I got a feeling that we might not see 60k for a significant amount of time the next time around, right? And that's not to say that it's not bullish. It's just thinking in terms of the time frame, right? That here today is a long, long way for us to come and spend, another year, 2, 3 before breaking again, right? So these are the kinds of things you just want to keep in mind, right? These are the kinds of things that, nothing's negative, nothing's, bearish, nothing's doom and gloom. We don't have to see 12k, right? I just think the 2 scenarios now for me, main scenarios that are left on the table, is the brutal, right, which brings us back to 25k, and the obvious B, which kind of brings us back to the same regions, right? But, so the main thing for me is, do we grind up, piss everyone off, and drop hard, or do we fake this move, close below, and drop relatively slow? Right? These are the 2 options right now in terms of where we are. If you're looking for taking this move up, right, just be sensible, right? Move your stop loss, etc., etc., and enjoy the ride, right? That is ultimately, where you need to be. Right? So in that sense, guys, look, I wanted to put this out there. I wanted you guys to see this in terms of the logic, what I've covered, and the main reason I've said nothing's changed. Nothing for me has actually changed, right? Everything I've said, everything that I've looked at, everything that I've done, right, is nothing's changed, and hence nothing's changed, right? It's not, oh, nothing's changed in the price. It's nothing's changed since doing the analysis in the first place. If we didn't accumulate, we were still in a corrective move. If we breached the corrective move and we're into a bullish, the bullish move is capped. Hence, nothing's changed, right? So anyway, hope you enjoy this one. Thanks for watching all, and I'll see you on the next stream. Cheers.